We're live.
I'm not wearing a bra,
You're
so try
live.
not to put the camera on me.
I hope we got that on the audio.
We did. We had already gone live.
Everybody knows.
Sorry.
All right, then I guess you can put the camera on me then.
Welcome to the Monday night surprise hour.
You should see him blushing.
I need some more noggin. Where's my sword?
Right.
All the swords are put away because of Brennan.
Well, he's not here. I can have swords anywhere I want. Welcome to Toltec Discussions with Golden Eagle. I'm your host, Golden Eagle, and this is the cackle crowd. So, we just finished a month and a half of warrior philosophy on what it means to be a Toltec warrior. So now we're moving on to new pastures. Was that a wave at me? Did somebody have something to say? Or
Did I wave at you?
yes.
I
When?
didn't intend to.
Okay, then I'll ignore it.
Okay, I don't know where it was, but no.
No, it looked like you were trying to get my attention from somebody on the chat. So if that's not the
I was
case,
probably using me a conduit to make the computer work better. Seriously, I was probably going
Okay.
like.
all right. Did anyone happen to notice the Facebook post I made for the announcement of today's discussion? One, you liked it. Did you actually read the photo? Do you remember what it said? Because I know some of you aren't on Facebook, and some of the people watching may not be on Facebook. So I'm not going to assume you did. The true student will read between the lines and gain wisdom. If the light is in you, the light which is engraved in these tablets will respond.
That's a nice quote.
That, yeah, came from a really good source. That came from Thoth, or should I pronounce it more correctly? Thoth. That's how he pronounces it. From the Emerald Tablets of Hermes. It's like up at the beginning to say, pay attention, read between the lines. There's more here than meets the eye. We heard Miyamoto Musashi say that in the Book of Five Rings. We heard Sun Tzu say that in The Art of War. All the illuminated manuscripts are a portal.
Porthole?
No, portal, P-O-R-T-A-L, not P-O-R-T space H-O-L-E. There's a difference between a portal and a porthole. If you know how to operate a dictionary, I'll let you figure it out. No, a portal. The illuminated manuscripts are a connection to something higher, a higher level of knowledge. The words are just a signpost, a guide to that portal, which you then have to open and allow the higher gnosis to come through. So when you read the Bhagavad Gita, there's the words on the page, and then there's the higher level meanings, right? When you read the Judeo-Christian Bible, same thing. The whole thing from front to end, from the Old Testament to the end of the New Testament, is a parable. Everything there uses historical figures to impart a message, but there's at least two layers of the message. There's a hidden meaning that we can can figure out with our rational mind. You know, the parable of throwing the seeds on the stony ground versus the fertile ground. But then each one of those parables, there's a higher level meaning behind it that can't be put into words on this plane. There's a knowing, hence the term gnosis, that comes if you put yourself in the right state of mind, and that's mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, to allow your consciousness to receive that. When you're working with these esoteric manuscripts, the higher knowledge, the illuminated manuscripts, as they're referred to sometimes, the people who wrote them, the true illuminated manuscripts, they themselves were in an illumined state when they did the writing. My benefactor in the Toltec lineage is Coyote the Blind, and he recently taught a course on invocational writing, how to invoke, or i.e. deliberately bring through that higher level of gnosis. I have his permission now to teach that class,
Nice. Wow.
which I will do later this year at some point.
Awesome. Wow, that's a compliment to you.
And he's going to have a book that goes with it. It's part of his Novelissimo series. It's going to be the third one. So we're probably looking at late summer or fall to be teaching this. Some of you took the class, some of you did not. Everyone who is affiliated with this school will benefit from that class. So I was talking to him about several other issues yesterday, and I asked his permission. He said, yeah, just use the book as the guide. And I absolutely will do that, because he wrote that book in the illuminated invocational state, the same as he did the teachings of the Toltec survivor. And when you read, for example, Coyote's book, The Teaching of Toltec Survivor, especially the second edition that's now out, that is an illuminated manuscript. You need to read that in a meditational state so that you can receive more easily that higher level of knowledge. When you read any of these manuscripts that I'm going to talk about tonight, you need to do the same thing. I'm going to talk at a broad overview of some of the readings that I've asked you all to do. I've asked you to read 4 books. Coyote's book, 2 by Dion Fortune, and 1 by E.J. Grohl. And so I'm going to talk about that work as an overview tonight. And then I'm going to be pulling from bits and pieces of the 2 Fortune books and 2 E.J. books, one that's not on the required list. I'm also going to recommend a 3rd E.J. book that's not on the required list. And then we will get started in more detail in the Dion Fortune books first.
Talking about that material.
Talking about the material. So the books I have, for those of you who are formal students, I have asked you to read these books, and they were absolutely positively not chosen at random. There is a message in each that is important for your foundation. And that's the key to the theme of this new series of discussion we're starting tonight, right now. Which is, there's foundations to the higher level work we're doing, whether you're in shamanism or any other ism that is legitimate by being in harmony with, like, there's two things that make a legitimate lineage or a legitimate ism in my mind. One is the doctrines and the teachings must be in harmony with the tree of life. The tree of life being a roadmap to the universe, both macrocosmically and microcosmically. And if you ever find teachings that are not consistent with the tree of life, they are false teachings. The second factor that makes up a legitimate ism is that your ism must have an inner plane connection. There must be a link through at least one of the heads of your system, your ism, that has made contact with the Great White Brotherhood and is under guidance from that body. They are the body that is organizing the growth of humanity and has been for eons. I don't know what the true definition of eon is. It's way more than many.
It's longer than an era.
Oh yeah, it's long. I mean, I am literally talking about hundreds of thousands of years when I'm talking about eons. The attempts to advance the human race have been going on hundreds of thousands of years. No matter what conventional academia may have to say on this subject. When you have these interplane connections, you get to ask all manner of questions, and you get to know the truth. You get to see it for yourself. It's not just someone telling you. You get to go right to the source and go, oh, my. Well, that's not what they told me in first grade Sunday school class. I guess I have to throw that doctrine out. Fortunately, I had a hint of a spark in first grade Sunday school class. The little bit of a spark of knowing from my previous incarnations. And when they tried to shut me down, I shut them down instead. I walked over. And so I don't have to deal with that dogmatic doctrine that they ran down your throat when you're 6 years old. That's when I fired organized religion. So your legitimateism has to be in harmony with the tree of life. It has to have an interplane connection. And the writers of the illuminated manuscripts have those interplane connections. And that is a skill that you can learn. If you
Right? Or
decide.
the read.
Yes.
I knew this was.
Dean, who's online? Who we got?
Okay, well, Melody, Brennan, and Stellan are here.
Hi,
Hi,
Stellan and
guys.
Brennan. Oh, you too, Melody.
Hi,
And then
Melody.
they're in Texas,
Hi, Mary.
and they made it safe and sound. And Dennis is online,
Dennis,
Hi, Dennis.
and Maria,
Maria,
Maria.
and Will Rowland.
Will Roland.
I will.
Thank you for your kind
No, Rudy.
Monty. Not yet. I texted her later. I got the impression she might not be on time. So, and it depends on her internet situation. Last week she was on the cell phone, and she couldn't
Right.
log in, and so she may be watching. She may have texted me. I'm
Right.
guessing that's what she's doing. I don't have. Well, wait, what's this?
The ex cut off the internet.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
So, anyway, before we get into it, I want to acknowledge
She's on cell.
She is?
Will says that Hadid said she will be on the cell.
Oh, okay. We have one of our students from a foreign country who is here with us today. Lovely Louise. I think you need to put the camera on Lovely Louise.
Wave, Louise. There you go.
Wave, lovely Silverhawk. And now, please, may I have the camera back?
It's back. You got it.
You're pretty good.
Can everyone see this?
Yes.
This is the fleur de lis.
Oof.
It's the what?
Fleur de lis, flower of life.
Ah.
And this is the symbol of Quebec.
Yes.
Put it a little lower on your shirt. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I was trying to, I'll move that
Yeah.
out of the way temporarily. And the reason we are celebrating the Fleur de Lis in Quebec is that today is Quebec Day.
I love
Quebec
Quebec.
is working hard, as is Scotland, to get out from under the thumb of a repressive government that does not honor and respect them. And I wish you well in that endeavor.
That's beautiful.
You're welcome? What's that?
Bienvenue.
Bienvenue?
French is such a gorgeous language.
They just have such an odd pronunciation. It's so different. I mean, I studied Japanese, I studied Russian, I studied a teeny bit of Chinese, and then there's French. And that's one of the skills I keep threatening to get back into, is studying languages. It's great for left brain, right brain connectivity, and so I will do that.
Just invite her back to live with you for a while and you could converse in French.
Well, she's threatened to teach me. I have to be able to learn.
One word each every time.
Okay.
Maybe if you play chess, then you can speak French.
Oh, you could learn to do chess. Well, that's a challenge.
Checkmate.
I think I know the subject of our next weekend in Denver.
Move one piece and it's checkmate.
It is impossible to move one piece and check.
A higher place,
As
chess.
far as I know, the fastest checkmate possible is 4 moves.
Okay.
I don't think it's possible in less than 4 moves. I learned that one the hard way when I was learning. Oh, what? You left this open. But I learned. Okay, so the works I've asked you to study. Esoteric Orders and Their Work by Dion Fortune. The Training and Work of an Initiate by Dion Fortune. Oh, I have created things here, but I'm not going to be talking about it tonight. The Human Biological Machine as a Transformational Apparatus by E.J. Gold. And the other one I'm going to mention tonight, but we're not going to get into too much, is Life in the Labyrinth by E.J. Gold. Human Biological Machine and Life in the Labyrinth are Volume 1 and Volume 2 of the Bardos series. Volume 3 is actually a DVD. It has pictures on it that you experience. Bardotown. Bardotown is a model E.J. made of what the Bardos looks like. And then he got into the middle and he took photographs, and it's a powerful tool because it helps you get ready so when the next time comes you're traveling in the Bardos, you can recognize where you're at. valuable piece of mapping he's done for humanity. Thank you, DJ. And the teachings of the Toltec survivor is Coyote. So the theme, there's a flow of logic through these 4 books. Esoteric Orders and their work talks about the idea of doing the higher level work from the big picture. It talks about the fact that there is higher level work to be done. There are orders or schools which do the work and teach you how to do the work. And so in order to get ready to do that higher level work, there's some training and learning that's required. It's not natural. Our biological machines, which we'll get to that in a minute, the human form, the physical form, the core nervous system that we have can't comprehend this work. Almost everyone who's ever lived has needed a teacher to train them how to do it and how to recognize. So these 2 books, Esoteric Orders and their work, Training in the Work of Initiate, I actually think of as 2 sides of the same coin. One is the big picture about the work and the orders. The other is, what does an individual in the work do? And how do you get ready to do the work? So you can spend anywhere from a few years to many years just mastering the skills to do the work that the esoteric orders do. How fast you get ready and get up to that point of functionality to do the higher level work depends entirely on you, with the caveat that your teacher has a lot to do with it. You need to pick the right teacher. You need to pick the right ism. And then you have to come and be prepared to work. And there's an awful lot of this that, like I say, it's not what we would normally think of. It's not what we would sit around as a child and dream, oh, when I grew up, I'm going to be a fireman. Oh no, I'm going to be a veterinarian. But I want to be a race car driver or an astronaut. When I was a kid growing up, I did not hear a single person say, oh, man, when I grew up, I want to be a shaman. Oh, it's just a shaman, man. I want to be a wizard. Of course, I didn't play Dungeons and Dragons. There were people who liked Dungeons and Dragons, which I started hearing about once I was in high school. That's got to go away. This material is so different than the physical world we find around us that it's just not something that anyone really recognizes or thinks of. So, there is higher work to be done. Here's how you get trained, an overview. It's not the training, it's kind of the roadmap to training, what you can expect, etc. To get ready to do that work. Coyote's book, The Teachings of a Toltec Survivor, that book is about a lot of the details of how this higher level work gets done with a mostly Toltec point of view, but not entirely. Coyote, you have to remember, is trained and initiated into 3 higher level lineages. He's trained in the Toltec lineage and initiated. He's trained and initiated in a yoga lineage, the fullness of the yoga philosophical system, not just the tight, stretchy pants exercise. I put it so much kinder than Kuru, but he doesn't have a lot of respect for what the Westerners have done to the fullness of yoga. Nor do I. I have a great deal of respect for it. I'm just not trained and initiated. And it's unlikely I will be. There is a really, really funny video you can find on YouTube about, it's a hypothetical situation. What if Gandhi came to a modern yoga class? It's absolutely hilarious. You should go look it up and find it. Not just for fun, as a good laugh, but also to develop an awareness of how far modern exercise yoga has strayed from the idea. It's worth watching for that. So Coyote brings in, his third lineage is the Western esoteric mystery tradition, magical traditions. He's trained and initiated in that.
You mean like Western,
As opposed to Eastern.
like Northern American?
So no, like it's more based in the European traditions. They're the ones who started uncovering the knowledge from the Judeo-Hebrew traditions, combining it with the Egyptian traditions, and the Magi. There was, through the Middle East, there was undercurrents. It was always there. It was very hidden. And certain dark churches, very large churches, based in certain parts of Italy. That country inside Italy that isn't Italy.
Vatican City.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say that. Since you did. Yeah, that one
So wait.
has, yeah. So, yeah, little BSMF right there. They never liked this material. They used to kill people if they found you studying. So that's why I don't like them. Knowledge is for everyone. And if you can go direct and talk to God, you don't need a pope to tell you you can't. And you don't need a pope to tell you, oh, you're only allowed to have this little morsel of truth over here. And trust me on the rest of this garbage I'm feeding. When you go direct, and that is one of the main skills that an esoteric school teaches, is the ability to go direct. So you don't need priests, you don't need gurus, you don't need shamans. I'm working very hard to get you all to the point where you can fire me. Yes.
I have a question then. Okay, so right now you're saying we get to fire you as the teacher so we can go direct. Earlier you said you can't learn this esoteric information without the teacher,
Right. You need the teacher to get you to a certain point.
and then you get rid of the teacher.
Right. And then you don't need a teacher. Now, in the Toltec traditions, we continue to work in a Toltec party. And at that point, it's less about teacher-student and it's more about everybody holding their own post.
Gotcha.
It's sort of like a football team.
Mm-hmm.
The coach is on the sideline. He's taught the people. Now they're out on the field playing the game. You've got a quarterback who has to lead the team. And on defense, it's usually the middle linebacker that leads the team. But everybody knows their job. Everybody's trained in their job. The blockers block, the runners run, the pass catchers catch, and the tacklers try to stop all that.
And at the same time, while you may go off and do your own work, you may not want to leave the protection of the lineage and the connection there. You know, it's you're doing your own thing. Just like you go through school, you can go through higher education, graduate school, you know, your internship, you go off and do your own thing in the world, but, you know, you maintain a connection to the philosophy or, you know, mixing that with your own medicine, whatever you're doing.
Well, I'm a perfect example of that. I studied for many years as a student in Coyote School. But he and I both knew that when I got to a certain point, it was my destiny to go form my own school, which I have done, and to train another Toltec party. And some of you may be the ones who go off and become a Toltec shaman lineage and form a party. But we still will hopefully all be working with the lineage. So when I have a question, I ask who comes up from time to time. Mostly I ask my upline into the Toltec ancestors. It's through them, is one of the routes I have a connection to the Toltec program. It's through the ancestors. So I've gotten to that point. Coyote trained me. I'm not under his day-to-day guidance and tutelage. Does that make sense? Okay. So yeah, we want you to get to that point. So that's what Coyote's book about is. He's pulling from 3 different lineages, and he's presenting a lot of the concepts, and he has a lot of interesting exercises in there to start the process of developing in you of what it takes to understand this material and to start working on the higher planes. That's really what it comes down to. Is an ability to work on all the other planes, not just this one. Now, EJ's book is very different, and if you've met EJ, you kind of understand that EJ's not like anybody you will ever meet. That EJ is an example of what someone is like when they are born enlightened. In this lifetime, I've had to work to get to the point I'm at. I don't even know if I could say enlightened. And Coyote describes enlightenment, and I'll probably get the quote wrong. Basically, the implication is, enlightenment is just kind of like this phase you go through on your way to doing the real work.
It's waking up.
Yeah. Once you're awoke, then you have to go do something else. So it's just a step in the process. So, but EJ came in fully connected, and he's been doing this work all his life. And what this book is about, the human biological machine, this is part of what the great work is on this planet, which is we're trying to evolve the human form to have a more sophisticated nervous system, which allows more sophisticated connections to our light bodies. We're trying to use that and the stimulus we can gather here to drive the evolution and to become, for our light bodies to become more sophisticated. There's in a physics term, there's a voltage difference that drives a current. And that can only be done by being anchored here in the physical and up in the etheric and beyond. And that current that results from the work we do here causes a change in the evolution of our essential self. That's the target. And then the physical body, if you want to think of it that way, is driving changes in the light bodies. And as the light bodies get more complex, that in turn facilitates and drives the changes in the physical body. It's a two-way process, and we need both. The goal of which, I think I talked about last week, I'm not sure where it was, which is the purpose of what Teotihuacan is. Anybody remember how I described the city of Teotihuacan? Okay.
the whole description.
Well, no, there's just, it's the city where gods are made
Or forged.
or forged. I like the term forged because there's a lot of examples in this higher level work of forging something into something else. So like iron into steel, you have to heat it, you mix the iron and the carbon and the trace elements at the right proportions, and then when it's all nice red hot, you bang it with a hammer. And then you do it over and over and over. You're burning off the dross and burning off the impurities, and then you're adding in the iron, the carbon, and then trace elements of like strontium and boron and things, just maybe titanium, and you make steel that's ultra strong, ultra hard, and at the same time very flexible compared to the iron you started with. So that alchemical process is a direct analogy for what we're doing to ourselves when we take on this work. By definition, putting yourself into the fire and then allowing yourself to be pounded is not comfortable. It's not comfortable physically or emotionally or mentally or spiritually. And you can't get from point A to point B unless you do that. So that's some of what Dion Fortune talks about in her books, is there's a process involved and you got to push through. So what EJ's book does is the goal of the book is to teach you the steps required to wake up and how to use the design of our physical bodies, i.e. what he calls the biological machine, as a tool to wake up the essence. Because once you really can't do the higher level work until you wake up. And we have to train the biological machine to place itself under the control of the essence so that it doesn't panic and freak out when it's starting to wake up. From the mind of the ego, which is the innate mind of the biological machine, waking up implies a loss of control. And the biological machine and the ego mind wants to be in control because that's how we survive. It is a misunderstanding propagated by some light worker, esoteric, light fluffy teachers that we need to get rid of our ego. If we get rid of the ego, we would die. The ego is what keeps the machine alive. It's that innate intelligence, it's that instincts. It's the one that has us running away or climbing a tree the instant our nervous system detects the growl of the tiger. Before the conscious mind has an opportunity to think, oh, big, furry, orange and white, black stripe, cat-like creature, large white fangs, making noise, lunging at me. Oh, this is dangerous. I need to. Too late. If our conscious mind had to go through that train of logic at every potential threat, we'd be dead. So we have the ego mind, that instinct. It includes the fight or flight reaction. The sympathetic nervous system instantly has you running, or if you undergo the training of a warrior, you don't just run away and scream. You go into warrior mode. And you grab your spear, or your stone club, or your samurai sword, and you go toward the threat, not away. But it takes a lot of training for the warrior to condition that response. If threat, then attack. Oh, that was a tiger. Ah, just got myself a nice one. Tigers are huge, right? They're 400, 500, 600 pounds. You'll get one chance if you're using like a spear or a bow or a sword. You get one chance to strike, so don't miss. If you can't handle that kind of training, then you better decline the training. Better to run. Not everybody can train to do that. So we need to learn to place our ego under the control of the essential self in a way that won't threaten the ego. So it's teaching the ego to develop a conscious partnership with the essence. So that's the big picture of E.J.'s book, The Human Biological Machine as a Transformation Apparatus. Now his book, Life in the Labyrinth, is more about the macro dimensions. Like, okay, you've woken up and now you're voyaging, now what? It's learning how to make your way without freaking out, without getting lost, without getting eaten. And yeah, there's creatures in the macro dimensions who will try to eat you just the way a tiger in the jungle might try to eat you here. It's a very real threat. So learning to navigate the macro dimensions, learning to maintain that calm in the chaos with no frame of reference, learning how to put yourself together without your mind is an important skill to develop.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
Not yet. It has to do with crossing the abyss. So when you get to a certain point on the tree of life, the act of crossing the abyss to gain the highest realms causes the disintegration of your mind as you know it. And so you need to have developed the habits of how to put yourself back together without the mind. That's what E.J.'s quote, "Your habits will carry you through," is all about.
Yeah, so and also that's a big part of the study of the Book of the Dead is that once you've died, the mind begins to unravel. So the essence needs to be able to remember who it is and what its instructions are, aside from the biological mind, which will there's reverberations of that for some time as you go through the 49 days. But basically, that's what is causing the hallucinations, is as the mind starts to unravel.
Yeah. So the American Book of the Dead, I've talked about before, that's one that's really good to familiarize yourself with. And there's a couple of editions out there. The Angel's Healing Guide covers the same material from another point of view, and then there's another one, I don't remember the name of it. I like the basic American Book of the Dead. So I'll talk more about E.J.'s sense of humor. It doesn't play well for people who are under 50. There's some generational aspects there, but if you can bend your mind around that, I like the core ADD better. That's just me personally. So one of the things I want to talk about regarding both Dion Fortune's material and EJ's material is I've asked those of you who are students to read these things, and I have received feedback that they're hard. Part of me wants to just say, kind of, well, duh. You're learning how to navigate the higher planes. You're learning how to become a shaman. You're learning how to do all this stuff in 19 dimensions, not just 3. Of course that's going to be hard, especially with a 3-dimensional mind. So part of the work in training in a shamanic lineage is taking your mind from 3 dimensions to 19. And there's a stepwise process with that. So yeah, it's hard. But both Fortune and Gold, EJ Gold, their works are illuminating. As I described earlier tonight, about what is an illuminated manuscript. I'm mentally going backwards on the clock. Those works are illuminated. They are designed to put your consciousness in a particular state so that you can receive a higher level of understanding that is there and available that you cannot receive unless you engage with it. And they're written in English. I'm so sorry. English as a foreign language must absolutely be atrocious to learn. It must just suck. I saw a coffee mug go by on the internet today. It talks about how hard it is because we have rules on grammar and spelling, like I before E except after C, except, like all these words where it's not done that way. And there's like 10 or 12. Like weird. It's weird. No, weird is violates the rules. Wait violates the rules. All kinds of words. So it's a hard language for me. I apologize for my Anglo-Saxon ancestors.
I would think Dion Fortune might be available in French.
We could look. There's a French translation.
Actually, there is a site in London that has her books that is, they're republishing them.
Well, let's see if we can't find it in French. You haven't found it. Well, we can keep it. Business opportunity for you. Hello, Black Jaguar Kitty.
Smokey, you need to settle down. You're being wild.
So I apologize that English is a hard language. If I had my way. You're upsetting my backdrop on my.
And Dion has her language in itself. I mean,
I'll talk about her language.
yeah, it's hard.
The big picture on both EJs, which is hard for a different reason, is when I read EJ's stuff the first time, I had to get out a dictionary. Okay? And I'm not a stupid guy, right? I've got a lot of education, probably way more than any one person should have. And that's a side effect of not being able to decide what you want to be when you grow up. Well, do I want to be a rocket scientist? Do I want to be a doctor? Do I want to be an author or a physicist? I can't. I'll just be all.
Goat farmer.
Goat farmer. I've been a goat farmer. I had to read goat books. So yeah, it's hard. But But that's part of what's required to engage with the material and to get yourself into that illuminated state where you can receive the higher level messages that all these books have. It's not just about the words in here. It's about the fact that these words are going to open something that will flow in.
So that's what Coyote meant by this book will open windows.
There's a phenomenon that can happen when you're reading a true illuminated manuscript, whereby you pick up the book, you start reading, okay, I get to chapter 5, now I'm reading chapter 6, and then 7, and you read the book, oh wow, that was really interesting, right? And then, let's say 6 months later, you go back, oh, I need to find that thing, I want the exact quote, and it's not in the book. The first time this happened to me, I was reading a high-level book, and there was an awe-inspiring section. And when I went back to find it, it was not in the book. Okay, I'm just not being patient enough to flip through and look. So I reread the entire physical book,
I know, I've done
about
that.
200 pages, and it wasn't there. And when I meditated on it, I think, well, yeah, you were reading the higher level book before. He showed you the stuff that's not in the physical book. And that will happen. And sometimes it's just, okay, you read the book and you will get gnosis afterwards. And sometimes you can actually be reading it and you will read the words and they aren't in the physical book. It's just like you think you're turning the pages, but you're turning the pages of the higher level book that aren't in this one. All of that is possible. Yeah.
Or sometimes you read it, you don't understand it, you continue to read it and ask your higher self to explain it to you.
Yeah.
Or just to show you what to feel it and to bring it to you.
It comes. And as Bonnie's fun to say, you can just sleep with this under your pillow and you will get knowledge. And that's true.
With all of us, your pillow way up here.
Well, I suggest one at a time.
Okay.
You don't want to get that princess and the pea phenomenon, where you could get a headache because you sucked on something hard. So that's my message to everyone is these books are not ordinary. There's a trail of logic through these 4 books, and each one of the 4 is a gateway into many others. And by gateway into many others, I'm not referring to the higher level portals that they can open. I mean, like, EJ is the human biological machine. This is a gateway to the other 2 books in his series. One is the videos and one is the Life in the Labyrinth. It's a gateway to everything else he's written, and he's written voluminously. You know what, at least 50 books to 100, something like that. And he's amazing, right? I mean, here's this living avatar, this living, enlightened, high-level being who's down here to help humanity. He didn't have to be.
Trying desperately to wake us up.
And he keeps throwing stuff out. Well, then try this. Well, then try this. Well, go try that. And we just had talked a bit about martial arts the past couple months. There's a quote from the famed martial artist Bruce Lee, who died way too young, which says, "Absorb what is useful."
Oh, I like that.
Just know that what is useful today may be different than what is useful next year, and so on. And you come back to the same material again, and it will be useful in a different way. But absorb what is useful. So EJ throws out 50 things, and 3 of them might stick. Fine, go do those 3. You'll be happy with that. But do something. Sort of like what I talked about with regards to the academy, is use the academy. Yes, use it for the benefit of all beings everywhere, which means do it for good, don't use it to harm anyone, don't use it for black magic, but use it. It needs to be used. It's how we will upgrade humanity. One of the ways. So, now let's talk a little about Dion Fortune. Anybody think that's her real name?
That's not
Anybody remember what her real name is?
Martha?
Bertha, Mary, something.
There was,
I did, I remembered it, and then now it's gone.
I don't know.
I
mean,
forgot her
something-
real name.
Violet.
Yes.
Violet.
Violet M. Firth.
I would go with Dion Fortune too, with the last name of Firth.
But do you know what a firth is?
That's
Think Gallic.
What?
Gaelic. Gallic language.
The
Or
Firth
Celtic
of
language. Firth of Forth. It's a bay. It's a long, narrow inlet. It's related to the Norse word fjord. Okay, I am going to read the introduction to esoteric orders and the work. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. You're supposed to be reading this. But in terms of this conversation, I'm going to read her introduction. This particular volume has forwards by some guy who I don't know, and I'm going to ignore. So here is the introduction to esoteric orders and their work. In all ages and among all races, there has existed a tradition concerning certain esoteric schools or fraternities, wherein a secret wisdom unknown to the generality of mankind might be learnt, and to which admission was obtained by means of an initiation in which tests and rituals played their part. Whoever is familiar with the literature of folklore and anthropology knows that this belief exists among primitive peoples, from the Eskimos of the Arctic circles to the Digger Indians of Tierra del Fuego, which Tierra del Fuego is the very southern tip of South America, the land of fire. Long periods of time, it's down near the Antarctic Circle, so they would light huge fires that the ships sailing around the Horn would use to navigate. Tierra del Fuego, land of fire. Whoever has also studied history knows that it has prevailed from the first dawn of human culture. Today, in the centers of the civilized world, this belief is still alive. And although it may be ridiculed by the orthodox-minded, an unprejudiced observer cannot fail to note that some of the noblest of men have been among its advocates, and that the greatest creative intelligences have, almost without exception, borne witness to a source of inspiration in the unseen. It is hard to believe that this rumor should be so widespread and so long-lived if it were entirely without foundation. Moreover, the fact that it has the same form among races who have no intercourse with each other, such as the primitive Mexican and primitive Egyptian. Now, that I have to disagree with.
Right, because that would be Atlantis.
This was written at a time when the pre-Columbian, the actuality of pre-Columbian, meaning before the time of Columbus, of transatlantic travel was unknown. which we now know has been going on for tens of thousands of years, and Atlantis being a big deal. But still, I think the point is there. I think she could just pick different examples with today's knowledge. There is further evidence in favor of its truth. It is not possible to demonstrate to those who are without the pale the existence of the organizations to which we have referred, because with the revelation of their secrets comes the obligation of silence. So that's very convoluted writing. This is what a lot of you are finding difficult. She was writing in the early 1900s, almost 100 years ago now. This was originally published in 1928. She was, I think, in her 40s or 50s at this time. So she was born in the 1800s, meaning she was educated in the 1800s. And so that's at the end of the Victorian era. Academia then was viewed very differently. You had to be very verbose. You had to set forth your premise in excruciating detail. You couldn't just rely on the fact that somebody else wrote a book that established the fact that you needed, because then you'd get into having to defend that other author. So you had to put all your stuff in your own book. And this was done at a time when women, as in general, didn't have a large role in academia or in these esoteric orders. That was highly unusual. Even though back in the 1870s, Helena Blavatsky had kind of paved the way for that, about 50 years before this time, there really weren't a lot of highly accomplished women in the esoteric work between the time of Blavatsky and Alice Bailey and Annie Besant. There were a couple. There was
But
some.
even among the male authors of that period, because they're in Victoria, England, still kind of under the thumb of Christianity. So to talk about magic, to talk about esoteric secrets, to talk about sacred knowledge outside of those structures was heresy.
Right.
And so even and 100 years ago, you could probably still be burned at the stake somewhere for that.
Well, yeah.
So the thing is that they have to lay out their argument academically so that you can, so that they're valid. And especially in the case of a woman during that period, they really felt the need to, support everything that they had to say. But at the same time, this is, I think, directly related to what you were talking about in the beginning, or what you set out in your email, is that there's really important hidden information in these books, and this in particular, that because of fear of persecution have to be hidden within the book. So often there'll be a premise that, we're talking about this one thing, but there's only hints in there that we're talking about that and much higher levels of that.
Right.
Right.
So that is a problem of the era and the fact that she happened to be female in a very male-dominated world, in a very, very male-dominated country. If she were in France, it would not have been this hard. She should have gone to France. But she did. She stayed in England, and we have what it is. There really isn't, to my knowledge anyway, a better introductory level book to this concept of esoteric orders and how you work in the training as an initiate in these systems than her books. Do you have something?
Can you just really briefly maybe explain what some of these might look like, the masonry and the fact that even though on the outside they may look completely different, their structure is the same, and that's what we're talking about, going clear back to the ancient mystery schools, you know, in Egypt and in Greece and you know, whatever, even today, the
Well,
structure.
that's actually a big part of the material in this book.
Right, that's what I mean, but I
Yeah.
mean, just,
Well, I can give a brief overview. All the esoteric schools, the true ones, have 3 major levels of initiation. Usually, the first 2 levels combined make up what is referred to as the lesser mysteries. The 3rd level is referred to as the greater mysteries. There was a time when the first level required 7 years. The 7 years was not selected at random. You undergo an initiation and then you undergo a course of training. And the initiation connects you to energy currents, and so your light bodies begin to be altered, your physical body begins to be altered. And the 7 years in part is related to how fast can the average person learn certain material, coupled with the fact that every 7 years, plus or minus an error range, all the atoms and molecules in your body are changed out. Every time a cell divides, every time it breathes in, it breathes out, molecules are broken down and expelled. And new molecules from breathing, from eating, are brought in, and your cells and your organs are repaired. And so when people have done the calculations for like, okay, how many cells are there in a body? How long does it take a cell to change out all its molecules? The answer is about 7 years. Now, some organs are much faster. The lining on our stomach is about a week. We grow a whole new stomach lining every week because our stomach acid is eating away the old.
Amazing.
Yeah. But others, like our bones and some of the other more dense organs, it takes longer to change those molecules out. So after 7 years, every time you bring in a new molecule, it's kind of set with a new vibratory frequency. And so after 7 years of working as an initiate at the level 1, you literally are a different person. Then you undergo the level 2 initiation, which is 5 years. And then you're ready for level 3, the greater mysteries. And if you've successfully completed your work in the 7 years and then the 5 years, and then you pass into level 3, the greater mysteries, you're referred to as being 12 years of age spiritually. Doesn't matter if you're 30 years old, 40 years old, 70 years old when you get there. You're now 12 years of age spiritually because you've done that block of 12 or more years to get there. So when you go through the Christian Bible and it says Jesus was lecturing to the Pharisees and the high-level leaders in the temple in Jerusalem when he was 12 years of age. Maybe that means he was 12 years old chronologically. If he was born enlightened, it may be that he was 12 years of age chronologically and had completed his 12 years of training. It could, though, mean he was however old he was, and now he had completed his 12 years of training in the esoteric schools, which maybe not even all these priests had done. And so they would listen to him because he was actually a higher level initiate than they were. And they kind of sort of had to. So those 3 layers of initiation correspond to taking your consciousness through 3 different levels of the 3 triads on the tree of life. The lower triad is referred to as the golden dawn. The middle triad is referred to as the rosy cross, the rose croix. And the upper triad is referred to as the silver star. When you see those in the higher planes, you will understand whence their names come. So these esoteric orders are all set up that way. Whether it was the Delphi mysteries, or the Zoroastrian mysteries, or the Egyptian, or the Greek, or the whoever's mysteries. In India, it was done this way. They look similar because they're tapping into the same place on the higher planes. That's what she's alluding to in her introduction, portion of the introduction I just read. And we know that through Atlantis, we know that the Toltecs were in North America and they had the same knowledge as the Egyptians, and so that's where some of the similarities come. We know there was ocean-going sea travel between India and Central America. We know there was ocean-going travel between China and the west coast of North America. Human life and human civilization are far older and far more complex than conventional academia wants you to know. So ignore them and go direct and learn the truth yourself. That's what I recommend. And pay attention to the other 90% of the information that is available that academia said, no, that's forged. That's a fake. Ignore that. Reminds me a lot of the movie Wizard of Oz, where the wizard is trying to tell Dorothy and her cohorts, oh, just ignore that man behind the curtain. Only pay attention to the big talking head up on the screen. Just like 1984, just like evening news today. Ignore the facts, just listen to what I'm telling you. So, is that enough of an overview now, do you think?
Yeah, that I think covers a lot of the history. I don't know if that answers any questions or not about what we're talking about, but so the through line in that is Masonry, which comes down to us through the Templars.
Well, I can tell you about Masonry, but then I'll have to kill you.
Right, but you had asked earlier about the Western magic and Western mysteries. Which culminates in this period of Dion Fortune with Masonry in Europe and these offshoots like the Golden Dawn and many other esoteric orders which were contemporary with Dion in her time.
So, Dion Fortune, okay, long story really short, the Templars gained access to knowledge in 2 places. One was in what we would now call southern France, though at the time, in about 1000 AD, the country France did not exist. There were a lot of independent small kingdoms and municipalities in that region, and in the general region, slightly north and slightly east of the Pyrenees Mountains, to the border with Spain. You have to mentally do that because I'm thinking in my 3-dimensional map here in front of me. And forgive my pronunciation, the Languedoc? Yeah.
non-Duc.
what she said, that there's a region that I pronounce Languedoc because I'm not a good French speaker yet, but I will be, which is a region where when Mary Magdalene and Joseph of Arimathea left after Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, they went there first. And there's a huge tradition in that region of what's now France that's all very well documented and very well known to this very day. And so they gained some specific knowledge there. They went to Jerusalem looking for very specific things, which they found and brought back. And it was a combination of physical objects and knowledge. And because of that, the Knights Templar bloomed, and for over 300 years, they were the most powerful fighting force in Europe, and they became very wealthy for a variety of reasons I won't go into. When the Pope and the King of France in the 1300s, who owed the Templars lots of money, betrayed them, the Templars scattered into many directions, one of which was Scotland, and it was in Scotland that modern Freemasonry evolved from the secrets held by the Templars. So from the early 1300s to the early 1700s, Freemasonry existed as more or less a true secret society. 4 of the lodges in London, it's always the English who betray us, decided to go public and created what was known as a Grand Lodge, where they united and started doing things. And there's some whole history after that. But 1717 was the year that occurred. And so that was more than 300 years ago now. And so that's where Masonry came from. And part of what they hold is the structure and the knowledge of these ancient esoteric rituals, but they've been altered in the Masonic line in that they're holding the portion that's for the male half of the tree of life. The way Masonry exists today, they don't have the portion that was female. That was considered to be sacred in a way, and has not been propagated in this way.
So who holds the female?
That's a good question. There are agencies around the world who claim to be coeducational Masonic bodies. It's called co-Masonry. And they claim to have it. But when I've read their rituals, they're basically doing Masonry and letting women in. And it's like shorting the 2 sides of an electric circuit together. You're just grounding out all the. It doesn't work.
It basically hasn't come down to us in an organized manner, whether the female pillar exists intact from the original origins or not. It probably came grandmother to granddaughter through rituals, women's rituals.
We know it
It
exists.
doesn't look the same.
It doesn't look the same. We know it existed at the time of Christ. One of the reasons we know that, if you know how to read between the lines, remember my quote at the beginning. I wrote it down to make sure I got it right. You have to read between the lines. Toltec said that.
It's probably Mary, because supposedly Jesus taught her the higher teachings.
You're on the right track, but not entirely. The name Mary is not a name. It is a title. There were more Marys surrounding Jesus than we can count. And in the Bible, the way it's worded, we're not sure if this Mary is the same as that Mary. It's because Mary is the title of women who were initiated into the feminine mysteries. It means healer, it means an initiate. So Mary Magdalene,
Mother Mary.
Mother Mary, all those
Mary
Marys
and
in the
Martha.
Bible were all women who were initiated in that feminine pillar system. So somewhere between year 0 and now, that was lost. And what I've been able to glean from my meditations and readings is it is being withheld right now because over the last 2,000 years, the patriarchy has been so ruthless at trying to stamp it out. They don't understand that you need both sides of the tree of life working together. You need males and females who are trained and initiated working as equals, not one either dominating the other. You can't have that. It won't work long term. And so the patriarchy was off the deep end. About 4,000 years ago, the matriarchy was off the deep end. And so we need to stop fighting each other and work together. So the gender of the energy currents, which are defined by the structure of the universe, is what we're talking about. And that's part of the work of an esoteric order. That's what esoteric orders do, is they train people to learn how to use those energy currents and work together. Let me see what else I have time for from her introduction of this one book. The different occult schools declare themselves beholders of a secret traditional science communicated to them in the first place by divine founders and enriched and revised from time to time by great teachers. This science concerns the study of the causes that lie behind observable phenomena and condition them. After preliminary tests as to character and fitness, the occult fraternities are prepared to communicate the theory of the science to accepted candidates, and subsequently to convey the powers for its practical use by means of ritual initiations. These, briefly, are the claims made for the occult schools by those competent to speak on their behalf. So that's very obtusely worded third-person language that says, I'm making this claim. She never comes out and says, I'm making this claim.
And I don't know if you guys caught this earlier, but when you were reading earlier, one of the key, I think it was where you ended the first time, that it was emphasizing the fact that when you are initiated, you're basically sworn to secrecy. You're holding, so unless you turn against, and even when people leave an order, they still hold the secrets. It's like kind of working for the CIA. It's, you may be out, but you're never really out. And so because of that, taking initiation seriously before you even enter in it into the first place, because it's far worse if you have to break it and not be able to do it. So these books are explaining part of what you're entering into when you're going into a school like this.
It is very frequently and very reasonably asked why it is that societies avowedly formed for the service of humanity, and having such valuable teaching to give, should not freely communicate it to all comers, should not, moreover, conduct active propaganda work in order to induce people to come and share their wisdom, and not, as they appear to be doing, hide themselves away as if seeking by every possible device to avoid observation and prevent themselves from being discovered by those who would learn from them. The answer to this question will be found when the nature of occult science is understood. It concerns certain little-known powers of the human mind and certain little understood aspects of nature. Were its researches into these subjects purely theoretical, there would be no need to guard their findings so carefully. But the knowledge of the facts thus discovered immediately reveals their practical applications. Knowledge bestows power in this field of research, even more than in the fields explored by orthodox science. Now, orthodox science includes nuclear weapons, right? They didn't know about nuclear weapons here, although we've had them in the distant past. But just the fact that dynamite and high explosives have been invented by this as part of orthodox science is telling you that she's making the claim that this stuff is potentially quite lethal.
And if Orthodox scientists took oaths not to use their discoveries for the destruction of humanity, we wouldn't have these kind of problems.
Yeah, unfortunately it doesn't work. Modern medicine supposedly takes oaths and they're out destroying humanity right and left. So I think we should hold them accountable. Now you violated your oath, guess what? You have one head too many. Knowledge but so is blah, 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 blah. Just, okay, I'm going to skip that. So that's basically what they're saying, is that this stuff is potentially dangerous. You can hurt yourself and others in big, big ways. So you need to be tested to make sure you're truly ethical. The training given in occult schools is designed to produce the adept, a human being who, by intensive training, has raised himself or herself beyond the average development of humanity and is dedicated to the service of God. Certain work in connection with evolution and the spiritual development and safeguarding of the nations is undertaken by highly trained men and women, though their work is never seen and the place of their training is never known. Their actual training, it may be said, is given in the inner planes, and only the preliminary training which fits them for the inner schools takes place on the physical planes, and this is 100% true. Consciousness is prepared for its great quest and adventures alone into the unseen. Not much can be told concerning this training, and not many are suitable for it, but enough has been said to give food for thought. So she's telling you right here, there's clues in here that will trigger you, hopefully, to read between the lines. That's our theme for tonight. Read between, and this whole series. Read between the lines.
You know, there's that, and this is even in the Bible, it's like the statement, for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. So that's the clue, that's the little secret decoder message that tells you, if you didn't understand what you just read, or what you're about to read, depending on how it's phrased, this is a good time to be in a meditative state, connected with your angel, using the Akadua to help you unlock the secret message in there.
So right here, there's a clue that the people who are trained in this higher work end up taking an oath and a vow to dedicate themselves to the service of God. That's the highest intelligence and organizing principle in the universe that you can imagine. Whatever that highest thing is. And that's especially important for those who may be just starting out, who haven't yet made that direct contact. When you make the direct contact, it's obvious. You have to have a belief in the higher power of God in order for these oaths to be meaningful. If you don't truly believe in God and you're tested to show if you do, then you aren't admitted. This is why a true ism needs that interplane contact, because the interplane contacts can see, does this person truly believe in God? And if the answer comes back no, they're lying, you're not admitted. And you'll never know why.
So it's the laws of the universe.
Yeah.
That's governing us.
Right.
I mean, an oath is only as good as you, I mean, it's between you and God. So if you don't believe, whatever you believe in, you gotta know that your deeds are known. And if you break your oath, someone will know.
Oh, yeah.
So where does Dion get her esoteric training then?
Oh,
She
thank
refers to everything as coming through the fraternity.
Yeah. I had meant to do that when I was doing my historical digression. It was in the late 1870s. That was when the early 1870s, there was a window of time open that is going to extend about 150 years. So we're nearing the end of this window that constitutes the transition from the old aeon to the new aeon. It's not just a hard glass switch. When that window opened, this knowledge started coming out. Helena Blavatsky, who was Russian, studied in India, and she lived in England for a time and then went back to India. She founded an organization called Theosophy, which is like the love of God, is what theosophy, is a Greek word, translates as. And I remember 34 years ago, when I was first looking for the higher knowledge, I had found a lot of garbage. But then I found the theosophical work, and hers was the first thing I ever read where I was like, oh, this is what I'm looking for. A lot of her writings are now outdated. And talk about needing a dictionary. I probably had to look up half a dozen words on every page.
You have to do that with Dion as well.
I had to do it a lot less with her, more so with each of them. But I spent my childhood reading, not doing anything else. So I had an excellent vocabulary, and I was still looking up half a dozen words on every page with Blavatsky. So that was one of the earliest organizations. An offshoot from that time was an organization known as the Golden Dawn. So they had an organization named after the esoteric traditions needed to get to the first level of the first set of mysteries.
I thought that came from Masonry.
No. Well, it's hard to say what came from what. The men who founded the Golden Dawn happened to have been Masons. Okay. So the Golden Dawn was founded, and like any Earth plane organization run by humans, egos got the better of them, and that organization split many times. One of the iterations in there is the organization that initiated Dion Fortune. There is another organization known as the Rosicrucians, or the Rosy Cross. They are purported to have appeared back in the 1600s and then gone underground. They were public for a time, then went underground, and now they're back out. Who purport to hold a higher level of knowledge than the Golden Dawn. And so there's a lot of, in the history of the last 150 years, finger pointing, he said, she said, you know, I remember probably 25, 30 years ago, first reading about this stuff and finding at least 4 organizations claiming to be the one true Golden Dawn, and ignore those other 3. And they were each saying that. And so I just kind of threw them all out and kept looking for something
it seems to be a trend. It'd be kind of like, you know, I don't know. Let's say you were raised as a Buddhist, and you decide, yeah, I like all this stuff, but I've got some other knowledge, so you're going to spin off and create your own thing. And it's so it looks like some of these other things, but for a while you have a like a shaman spinning off from another shaman school or another esoteric school who have the inner plane knowledge, and it's part of their responsibility to train somebody to be their successor, or to get their school up and running to a point where it can be self-perpetuating. And if you think about this, even Christ failed at this. Christ established his church. He had his 12 disciples. He was most certainly a mystery school, most certainly an esoteric school, and his apostles spread his word, which they did a good job of getting Christ's message out there. But as far as the school, it failed when the apostles died. It didn't continue. So this is something that you see a lot throughout history. You see it a lot in the scriptures, where okay, you've got this foundation. Now somebody goes off, and they're either successful or not in spawning a new school. So the biggest problem with some of these schools is they didn't leave a teacher that had the interplane connections. So then you're left with kind of a shell. And, and part of the reason that I mentioned about the Golden Dawn, and actually, as far as I'm concerned, the Rosicrucians are still going back to a similar, when I say masonry, I mean ancient masonry, that line that goes all the way back to Egypt, at least to the Templars, where we're sharing a certain kind of structure where there's like a little passion play done. And you go through these standalone rituals where if you have the right people standing in the right place, you don't need a teacher to know how to do it all. Although really they should be learning how to run the whole thing. But with the right people in the right place, something will happen. The initiation will happen. The interplane connection will happen, and you get that bump. Just like when you got the Akadua and you keep going up, you get that extra bump. And that is a key that I've seen personally that's the same in the Masonic organizations, in the LDS Temple, in the Toltec system, and even with the Akadua, as far as going through those first couple of levels, it's showing you the structure, and it works because it's a universal structure, and it comes from the tree of life, and it's part of the sacred geometry, and so all facets or aspects that we see and focus on are still part of that great universal whole geometry.
Yeah, the true schools are tapping into the same true source. It became obvious in retrospect, once I understood this, once I've been initiated, that every one of the Golden Dawn organizations I have looked at eons ago, last century, none of them had interplane connection. If you're not true to the path, that connection will be withdrawn. If you become full of ego, if you abuse your authority, if you abuse your knowledge, it'll be withdrawn. So what I would tell anybody out there is contemplating doing that is stop it. Right? Just don't do it. There's so much power in staying connected to that lineage and to that true source. I don't know why anybody would want to do anything else. They haven't successfully mastered the ego and placed it under the control of your divine essence. Because once you do that, it's like, it's not about me. It's what can I do to serve humanity? What can I do to serve God? That's what it's about. I wanted to read the introduction to Training and Work of an Initiate. I don't know if we have time tonight. Let me get to that next week. Do we have any questions online, in the room?
How do you stay connected, or like how the shaman stays connected, for example, with this world and with the inner planes? How do you keep that when you're doing your chores around in this world, or things you have to do, or work, and just to keep that channel open? I mean, with discernment, of course, but
There's several answers. One is practice. Two is when you have been initiated to this level. It's sort of like you've upgraded your cable TV package. I have channels that you don't, that keep me connected. Coyote has channels I don't, because he's a couple levels of initiation higher than me. EJ, he's got the full package, right? He's got all the channels. So there's a link there. In this lineage, when you become initiated, our nervous systems, our light bodies, aren't the same as ordinary humans. So we have capabilities that ordinary humans don't. And that's how we stay connected. So yes, I irrigate, I feed animals, I chop wood.
Did a
And
killer job cleaning the house today.
my house
And-
cleaner ran away.
And he had and he had the banishment CD playing the whole time.
oh, cool.
That hours.
Banish the dust bunnies.
Oh, I found it. So it's, from a Toltec point of view, it's using your attention. You have an intent and you apply your attention to it. And, 10 years ago I couldn't do what I do now. 5 years ago I couldn't do what I do now. 5 years from now I'll be doing things I can't do today. Because I'm continually working to upgrade. 5 years from now, you'll be doing things that today you're not capable of, if you keep on the path. So, yes, it's a challenge. And at some point, I lost that interest in the mundane. That's why it's so important for Aurea to remind me, oh, they need a break now. Right?
You really want to put him out in the hot sun at 5 o'clock in the
Yeah,
afternoon?
I did. Right? Because to me, it's like, that would have been better than not going, but you guys are still ordinary humans. Kind of, sort of. Your machine is still ordinary human. So I sometimes, that's one of the things I'm learning, is to be more astute at when you need a human type break, because I would just keep going. I don't eat, sometimes I don't sleep. I was up at 3:30 this morning writing my dreams down, which I still need to tell you about. It was interesting. And then at 5:30 I'm getting ready to go out and do my martial arts, and then by 7 I'm back and I'm doing farm work, and at 10 I start doing house cleaning, and then all afternoon I'm doing other work, and it's like I get done from here, I'm gonna have a phone call, and then I'll be up late reading and doing other stuff, and
He's a machine.
That's just the way I work, It's I sleep when I think I need it, and I'm not on a normal circadian rhythm anymore.
A what?
Circadian rhythm.
Sounds like a.
Sounds sexy,
I
doesn't
know,
it?
like a Zumba class or something. Ew, I wanna
24
learn
hours.
the circadian
Spelled
rhythm.
with a C. Go look it up.
It's 24 hours.
She got it.
What did you, what did you say?
Ding, ding, ding.
I didn't hear what you said.
24 hours.
It's
Oh,
the circadian rhythm is that cycle of 24 hours. That you get up at 6 and you go do this and then you go to bed and it's based on the pineal gland in large part doing things, but my glands aren't the same. Nobody who does this work has a physical body that functions the same. That's just what happens. I'm trying to do a lot of stuff on multiple planes. I don't have time for nonsense. You had a question.
I do. So in the very beginning, when you said the teachings must be in harmony with the tree of life, everything else that is not is false.
Yes, that's right.
Why?
Why?
Why do you say that?
There is a core design of the universe. Right? There's by the standard within physics, by the preponderance of evidence, there are 19 dimensions. There are 19 quarks that make up matter.
what's a quark?
Take my physics class.
Okay.
It's a subatomic particle. It's one step up from strings, which is one of the most core particles we have.
Okay,
It's in
thanks.
the audio video.
The structure of the universe is what drives the dimensions, drives the planes, the astral, and so on. And it's the roadmap of how the divine created the universe. It's the roadmap of how the divine creates particles. It's the roadmap of how the divine creates intelligence. So if you're working in harmony with that roadmap, you're working in harmony with the will of God. We have free will, so we can choose to make a religion that violates that. Like certain major religions that draw a line and said, none shall pass, like Gandalf and Lord, right? None shall pass.
Poor Louise. I said we gotta laugh at her.
And we're not talking about the nuns with the black and white
I thought it was
uniform.
Monty Python, not Poor Louise.
Yeah, I think
Well, what's Gandalf if it's the big
it
Oh,
was,
right.
it was, I think he said, you shall
You
not
shall
pass.
not.
Okay.
Yes.
It's the same principle. So certain churches draw that line, right? The glass ceiling, and oh no, only I have the ability to do it.
So is that what you're referencing to?
That's
Yeah.
one of many.
That if a religion or a teaching or doctrine says that, then that's not
Automatically,
following the tree
they're
of life?
full of garbage. Move on.
Wrong is.
One of the obligations of a true school is to, first of all, tell you that each one of you has the ability to make your own connections. Two, we have the obligation to teach you the formula for doing that. And it's just like a physics formula or a mathematical formula, it works. And one of the key parts of that formula is the alchemical transformations you have to put yourself through. If you're not willing to be the piece of iron that goes into the forge and gets heated and pounded to convert you into something new, you won't make those connections because the transformation is part of the formula. And I'm sure in your previous work you've seen students, either your own students or students in other systems where you were studying, who didn't want to do that. They wanted to stay comfortable. Oh, I'm just at a place where I just need to do my spiritual work and be comfortable. Well, you're not going to transform it. There's nothing comfortable about it.
So I think of the tree of life as the structure of the universe, and so any true path needs to be in harmony with that. If it violates universal law, which on one level you're going to get down to a few core things that have to be there.
Does that answer your question? Is that in an understandable way? Okay. Because if not, I'll make something up.
Yeah, I know, it's great. I understand Dion's, the way you're explaining Dion Fortune's words more than I do EJ's. I think it's because the humor.
We'll get to EJ maybe next time. I want to go through this training and work of mission. This was just like touching on the big picture of what's referred to often as the great work.
Yeah, I understand it.
So this one is, okay, what do you got to do the great work? Okay, so we'll talk about that next time. Any other questions in here? What about online?
No, they're pretty quiet.
They're pretty
You
quiet.
guys still out there?
Haven't seen it.
Is
Maria had
anybody
told
out
me
there?
a long time ago that the power might go out because there was a lightning storm.
Yeah.
So we told her to be safe. But yeah, I don't really see any questions.
Okay. So we're going to end here for today. Let's go ahead and go offline. Thank you for watching.
Thank you, Golden Eagle.
Like our channel.
Woohoo! It was a good broadcast. It was a good
Yeah,
broadcast.
excellent.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're going in a new direction.